Hi guys. Well, welcome to Dog Sunday School. Now going forwards, I've got some plans, particularly as we go into spring and summer, to film a lot more content actually out in the open, as it were. Okay, I've got a few training lessons that I'd like to demonstrate, at least with my own dogs, who are obviously at different levels in their development. But to do that, really, I need to set the tripod up outside and film from a bit more of a distance. Now, I did have in mind today a lesson for Dog Sunday School, which is actually, in fact, part of the initial induction that I used to go through for new enrollees at Dog Sunday School. Okay, there's also some questions that and stuff that I pose to new one-to-one clients as well. But I've had a change of plans, really. Um, And this has really been influenced by what happened this morning. So this is going to be quite a long video, probably a little bit too long for some people's attention, particularly on Facebook. So if you're not interested, scroll past. Yeah, I'm going to post it up on YouTube as well. But certainly, Facebook is changing as well. So what happened this morning? Well, as I often do, the first thing I did when I sort of come downstairs was put the kettle on, turned my phone on, checked my messages and my emails, and then, as most people do, scroll through the different sort of social media platforms, if you like. Well, I sort of half wish I hadn't really, and this is what this discussion is about today. Within inside literally a few seconds of scrolling through Facebook, I was hit with an advert from a relatively local trainer that seems to have popped up almost overnight recently, pretty much promoting that you don't ever need to correct unwanted behaviour. That you can simply teach a dog an alternative, non compatible behaviour, in other words, something to do instead that is not compatible with the unwanted behaviour. And you can simply do that instead, and that's going to be successful. Well, whilst I agree that teaching a non compatible or an alternative behaviour is desirable, and I certainly do it, and there is definitely a place for that, I don't agree and I can't agree that it's not necessary to actually teach the dog that no, that is off limits. You just cannot do that. Now, what I will say is when we're training and developing a young puppy, that if we can do that development of an alternative behaviour instead, before the unwanted behaviour arises, then of course it can be really instrumental in stopping that unwanted behaviour developing in the first place. And certainly I will do that as well. But quite often, when people call me, and what this trainer was advertising for was the resolution to an existing problem, a problem that has already developed and has already been reinforced many, many times over. And this is why I can't agree. Because purely trying to stop the dog from doing the unwanted behaviour through an alternative one, when that unwanted behaviour is already ingrained in the dog, is likely to fail. In actual fact, if you try and do it, the chances are you're not going to get any sense out of your dog anyway. It's actually not going to pay attention to you. It's just going to carry on doing what it was doing in the first place. So we have to interrupt that behaviour. And if we interrupt that behaviour with a negative consequence, something that's just momentarily unpleasant for the dog, it's less likely to want to perform that behaviour again. But more importantly, it's been interrupted. And the moment we interrupt it, then that, of course, opens the door for us to introduce, or rather to get the dog to practice the alternative behaviour that we've previously taught and introduced long before. And we've actually done these two things separately. Okay? The example they gave was that to stop your dog from jumping up, stealing food out of your hand, being a nuisance when you were carrying food, or possibly stealing food off your table and counter, that you should simply reward the dog for what you want. That's not going to work. And the reason why it's not going to work is because they are totally ignoring what we call the chain of behaviours. In other words, the linking of individual behaviours, one preceding the other, one predicting the other, that forms a chain. Okay? It's very, very simple. We do this all the time when we're training if we think about it. Okay? We ask the dog to sit, or in my case, I teach the dog, I use a hand cue, a hand signal if you like, okay, which is a continuation of the law, but I haven't got any food in my hand. So I start with the law, I fade the law, I work with an open hand, but I carry on the same action. The dog sits the same as it would as if there were food in my hand. Okay, and then at some point I'm going to add in the verbal instruction, if you like. Okay, if you want to call it a cue, call it a cue. But to me, it's an instruction. Yeah. And of course, the dog links all these things together because they predict the outcome, which is getting paid. But the same applies if one of those chains or one of those links in the chain is an undesirable behaviour. Okay? So if what we do is we try to redirect all the time, or we try to, that's the best term that I can use really. We try to redirect the dog. Yeah, we try to distract the dog is another term that we could use into doing what we want it to do instead. What the dog will very, very quickly learn, because they're not stupid, they will quickly learn, if I jump and steal food or try to steal food, mum will get the treats out and mum will then pay me for not jumping. So what does that do? What can that inevitably lead to? But an encouragement, an increase in the dog jumping, so you go and grab the treats, and try and redirect. Okay, so no, that's not the best way forward, guys. It really, really isn't. And if you've tried it, which many of you have, I know you have, you've realised it doesn't work. Well, I'm being honest. I'm telling you that I know why it doesn't work, and there is a better way. And if you work with me or you listen to some of these messages, you might be open to, investigating those. All right. The next, oh dear me, the next, if you like, feed that was pushed upon me was another local trainer who doesn't advocate at all for for any type of correction. All she pretty much, all she wants to, I didn't really want to give the gender away, but all they want to do is manage the situation. Manage it for 3 or 4 years. Work with them for 3 or 4 years, of course, continually paying them. But management is your answer. Management is your answer. Well, let me tell you, the longer you try to manage something, the chances are that that management is going to fail. The longer you try and maintain that management, the greater you are increasing your chances of that management failing. And then what are you going to do? Okay? But it was the way she delivered this message. Now, this is a person that doesn't advocate for any use of aversive. Like many people, her side of the fence. Yet, her message absolutely berated Anybody, trainer, owner, anybody that thought or felt that aversives were possibly necessary. Absolutely berated them. Used analogies that literally attacked the common sense of people. Yeah. Tried to belittle those people. Tried to discredit people like myself that don't agree with her. So what was she doing? Let's just think about behavioural modification and particularly what we call operant conditioning. What quadrants was she and others like her using on a daily basis? I'm going to tell you. She was using negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement, that thing that she doesn't ever want to use with a dog, that she's going to tell you you should never use with a dog, but she's quite happy to use it on you as an owner, on you as a guardian, if you want to use that term, and on people like me and other trainers. Negative reinforcement. In other words, yeah, applied pressure to get us to perform and you to perform, train the way she wants you to. And she's relentless in it with the pressure and the berating. She will literally keep that pressure on until you adapt and act the way she wants you to. But she denies that it's necessary. What else does she do? She applies positive punishment. She adds something to the equation, to the reciprocant, which is you when you're watching her videos, or me, or anybody else that's listening to that berating. She's using positive punishment, the thing that she never wants to go anywhere near, yeah, to stop me from teaching the way I do, to stop you as a dog owner handling and training the way that you want to. Yet, all these things, in her opinion, are unnecessary. Can we really, guys, look, I'm sticking my head up above the parapet here, but someone has to. Someone has to. Yeah? No one's advocating for being cruel to your dog. Nobody. You want to see how I live with my dogs? It's all on the videos. It's all on the videos, guys. Those videos, by the way, are unedited. Apart from me clipping possibly when I'm struggling with this remote, yeah, and when I'm fumbling about at the end, they're unedited. They're raw, they're amateurish like this one, and they're totally unedited. Guys, we've got to start calling this nonsense out. We really, really have. No, I'm not trying to apply pressure to you. All I want you to do is just think about it. Please, just think about it. Think about what some of these people are asking you to believe. Yet they're acting in a totally different way. It's not right, is it? It doesn't make sense. Why do they think that positive punishment and negative reinforcement will change my behaviour? Why? Because it does. These things work. You know, the other thing they do is, oh yeah, well, you can use aversive methods, and this is something that she harped on about. You can use aversive methods in the case of emergencies. In the case of emergency, that's totally different, and you can do whatever you feel like doing or you think is necessary. But how about we avoid those? Yeah? And I don't just mean through management. I mean through teaching. Why can't we use a minimally aversive consequence, much, much more refined, much, much more nuanced, much kinder to your emotions, are much kinder on your dog during teaching. Why can't we do that? Oh, by the way, she said that learning can only be affected through positive. That's wrong. That's wrong. We learn all the time and animals learn all the time. Yeah, either through our intervention or naturally through negative consequences. Okay, don't be fooled by that. You just slip that one underneath the fence. These things are wrong. They're fundamentally wrong, and you're being misled. Okay, here's what I would rather do. I would rather teach my dog that some behaviours aren't acceptable, so we can avoid escalating the aversive that we need to use, yeah, because we've lost control of our dog. Yeah, I'd rather teach my dog when it's well under threshold, by the way, I agree with that. When it's under threshold, in a learning state of mind, that some behaviours aren't acceptable, some overreactions to certain situations aren't acceptable. Okay? I don't always need to change the way the dog feels about something. Sometimes the way the dog feels about something is perfectly natural. And for me to try and change that is wrong, and it will never work because it's a natural instinct within inside the dog. But I can alter the way the dog behaves when it's feeling those feelings. And I can start that well below threshold, yeah, with clear communication, which may or may not involve a minimally aversive consequence for that behaviour. So the dog learns to listen to me. It learns to listen to the marker which is associated with that, or the signal which is associated with that. So before it escalates into an emergency, yeah, I can actually use that marker, I can use that signal, and the dog knows, okay, I need to just rein myself in a little bit. That's not telling me that I shouldn't be feeling the way I do, but that is telling me not to overreact or react or act inappropriately. That's much, much kinder. That's much more ethical. And if we think about it, it's much more realistic, and it's what we do, hopefully, with our children when we're raising them from a young age. Anyway, guys, this has been a long, long video. I'm not going to apologise for it, because if you didn't want to hear it, you could have scrolled past. All right? Maybe we'll get to this another day. But as I said, somebody has got to start talking sense. There are a few people doing it, and there are a few people believing what I'm saying, but keeping their head well below that parapet, or they're doing something clandestine in the background. Okay, well, I can't do that. I can't do that. Anyway, guys, hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.